Have you ever wondered what a path traversal vulnerability is? It's a type of security vulnerability that occurs when an attacker gains access to files or directories that are outside the intended directory or folder structure on a web server or file system. This vulnerability is also known as directory traversal or path manipulation. Now, you might be wondering, how does this happen? Well, it typically occurs in web applications or services that allow users to input file paths or file names without proper validation or sanitization. In simple terms, this means that the application is unable to correctly interpret or handle certain types of input from users. For instance, consider a web application that serves files based on user-provided file names. An attacker might try to manipulate the input parameters such as URLs or file paths to navigate to directories and access files that should be restricted. They might input something like passwd into the application's URL parameter, attempting to navigate to sensitive system files like the /etc/passwd file in a Unix-based system. Or perhaps they might try to access files within the web server's directory structure, such as configuration files, user data, or other files not intended for public access. The possibilities for exploitation are numerous and can lead to serious consequences if not addressed properly. Path traversal vulnerabilities can lead to various security risks, such as unauthorized access to sensitive files containing confidential information, credentials, or system configurations. It can also lead to the disclosure of system files, source code, or proprietary information. In the worst-case scenario, it can even result in the manipulation or deletion of critical files, leading to service disruption or data loss. So, it's clear that path traversal vulnerability can pose a significant threat to security. But don't worry. As we delve deeper into the topic, we will uncover how these vulnerabilities can be exploited, and more importantly, how they can be mitigated. So, stay tuned. Now that we know what path traversal vulnerability is, how can it be exploited? Let's dive into the methods an attacker might use to exploit this vulnerability. At the heart of the issue is manipulating user-supplied input parameters, such as URLs or file paths. The attacker's goal is to traverse directories outside the intended path and gain access to sensitive files. Consider a web application that serves files based on user-provided file names. An attacker might input a string like /etc/passwd into the application's URL parameter. This isn't a random selection of symbols. It's a calculated attempt to navigate to sensitive system files. In this case, the /etc/passwd file in a Unix-based system which stores user account information. But hackers don't limit themselves to system files. They might also target files within the web server's directory structure. These could be configuration files, user data, or other files that aren't intended for public access. Think of it this way. The application is a building, and the directories are rooms. An attacker exploiting a path traversal vulnerability is like a thief with a master key, able to open any door and access any room, regardless of whether they're supposed to be there. The potential damage depends on the files and directories accessible from the vulnerable application. Unauthorized access to sensitive files containing confidential information, credentials, or system configurations can be catastrophic. Imagine the damage if an attacker gains access to a file containing usernames and passwords, or a document with proprietary business information. Additionally, an attacker could potentially manipulate or delete critical files, leading to service disruption or data loss. It's like the thief not only stealing, but also vandalizing the building, causing chaos and disruption. The risks associated with path traversal vulnerability are considerable, but what exactly are these risks? Stay tuned to find out more as we delve deeper into the potential dangers and discuss how we can safeguard against this type of security vulnerability. Understanding the risks of path traversal vulnerability is key to grasping its threat level. Path traversal vulnerability is not a trivial concern. The risks it poses are often severe, with far-reaching implications that can compromise an entire system's security. Imagine a cyber intruder having unauthorized access to sensitive files. These could be files containing confidential information such as user data, system configurations, proprietary information, or even credentials. This is not just about stealing information, but also about gaining the potential to manipulate or delete critical files. The consequences? Think service disruption or data loss. Imagine your web application becoming unavailable to your users, or worse, your users' data being wiped clean. The damage would not just be technical, but also reputational. Consider another scenario: disclosure of system files. This could include source code or proprietary information that should never be public. This kind of exposure could provide a roadmap for attackers, making your system an easy target for future attacks. And it doesn't stop there. Attackers exploiting path traversal can potentially execute arbitrary commands. This could mean gaining control of your system, changing its behaviors, or even using it as a launchpad for attacks on other systems. Clearly, the risks are high, but fear not, there are ways to mitigate these vulnerabilities. Despite the risks, there are effective strategies to address and mitigate path traversal vulnerability. The first line of defense is input validation and sanitization. Make sure to validate and sanitize all user-supplied input, especially those containing file paths or directory names. The goal is to ensure that they don't contain special characters or sequences that could allow an attacker to navigate outside the intended directory structure. A whitelisting approach works best here, allowing only known safe characters or patterns. The second measure involves implementing strict file access controls. By setting up permissions on files and directories, access can be restricted to only authorized users or processes. This significantly minimizes the risk of unauthorized access to sensitive files. Next, consider the use of absolute paths instead of relative paths when accessing files or resources within the application. This simple strategy can prevent the exploitation of relative path vulnerabilities. Additionally, performing integrity checks on file paths or file names is crucial. These checks ensure that the paths or file names match an expected structure or format, adding an extra layer of security. Finally, don't overlook the importance of security headers and server configurations. Implementing these can enhance overall security. For example, configuring the web server to restrict access to sensitive directories or files can go a long way in preventing path traversal attacks. With these preventive measures in place, organizations can significantly reduce the risk of path traversal vulnerability and better protect their sensitive data and system resources.